In our previous discussion, we explored Bourdieu's foundational work, Being an Event, where he established that mathematics is ontology. Using set theory, he proved that at the most basic level, reality is a chaotic, ununified collection of endless fragments, what he called the inconsistent multiple. However, this left a massive problem. If reality at its most basic level is just an abstract, infinite mathematical set, how do we explain the vivid material and qualitative differences of our everyday lives? Set theory can explain that a stone, a human being, a political empire, and a star are all mathematical multiples, but it cannot explain why a stone is hard, why a star shines, why an empire exerts military power, or why a human being suffers. Set theory describes being, but it fails to describe appearance. To solve this profound problem, Bourdieu published his second major philosophical text in 2006, Logics of Worlds, subtitled Being an Event 2. If the first book answered the question, what is the mathematical structure of existence? The second book answers the question, how does existence display, manifest, and organize itself into a specific living world? In this text, Bourdieu switches his primary mathematical tool. He leaves behind the stark atomic logic of set theory and embraces category theory, specifically the mathematics of topoi or topos theory. While set theory looks inward at what an object is made of, category theory looks outward at how things connect, relate, and vary in intensity across a shared space. We will now transition from the cold reality of pure being to the active theater of the world, exploring how objects appear with different degrees of intensity, how worlds are governed by ideological frameworks, how bodies are organized to resist power, and how human beings can live a truly immortal life by participating in a subjective truth. Before we unpack the complex mathematical structures of logics of worlds, we must understand the cultural and political war that Bourdieu is fighting. In the preface of the book, Bourdieu states that our contemporary global civilization is completely dominated by an unspoken ideological dogma. He calls this dogma democratic materialism. This is the default worldview of modern late stage global capitalism. It can be summarized by a single unyielding sentence: there are only bodies and languages. Under this worldview, human beings are treated merely as biological machines. We have physical bodies that experience pleasure and pain, require medical management, consume commodities, and eventually die. To prevent these biological bodies from killing each other, democratic materialism celebrates a total tolerance for different languages, which means cultural identities, localized customs, religious opinions, and personal viewpoints. Democratic materialism tells us, live your life, protect your body, enjoy your consumer pleasures, respect other people's cultural identities, and do not believe in anything absolute. It sounds peaceful, but Bourdieu warns that it is a deeply nihilistic framework. By declaring that there is no absolute truth, it reduces human existence to animal survival and locks us into a system where everything, art, love, and justice, is reduced to a monetary transaction. To break out of this ideological cage, Bourdieu proposes an alternative framework, the materialistic dialect. His slogan modifies the capitalist formula by adding a third explosive element. There are only bodies and languages, except that there are truths. Bourdieu is a materialist. He agrees that there are no ghosts, no magical spirits, and no transcendent gods sitting in heaven. Reality is material, but he argues that Within our material world, certain extraordinary, universal, and eternal truths can break through the fabric of regular language and physical limitations. A truth is an exception to the rules of the market. Truths materialize, organize physical bodies, and allow regular human individuals to touch absolute immortality. To explain how things appear to us, Bourdieu introduces the concept of a world. A world is localized, structured field of experience. It can be a specific historical era, a political community, a musical movement, a laboratory, or a personal relationship. Inside any given world, thousands of different elements exist, but they do not all appear in the same way or with the same importance. To explain this difference, Bourdieu develops his theory of phenomenology, the logic of appearance. Every world possesses its own internal measuring scale, which Bourdieu calls the transcendental. Think of the transcendental as the invisible operating system or the regime of visibility that governs a specific world. The transcendental does not create existence, rather, it assigns a specific degree of appearance, an intensity of manifest existence to every element within that world. Bourdieu mathematically maps these intensities using a scale of values ranging from the absolute maximum to the absolute minimum. At the maximum degree, elements have absolute visibility, full structural power, and dominant status. At the minimum degree, elements are absolutely invisible, structurally erased from the world's official records. Let us look at a vivid contemporary example to make this abstract concept completely clear. The world of a modern Western metropolis like New York or London, who appears with the highest intensity of existence in this world? It is the billionaire hedge fund manager, the famous celebrity, or the political elite. When they speak, their voices are amplified across the media matrix. Their physical appearance is protected by architectural fortresses. They possess the highest degree of being there in that world. The regular middle class worker has a medium degree of appearance. They have a legal identity, a bank account, and a home. They are visible to the system, but their power to alter the transcendental coordinates of the world is severely limited. At the minimum degree of appearance, we find the undocumented migrant worker, the homeless person sleeping on top of a subway grate, or the invisible cleaning staff who work in the corporate high rises at midnight. Do they exist biologically? Yes, their being is undeniable. But within the logic of that specific capitalist world, the degree of appearance is close to zero. They are structurally invisible, uncounted, and politically mute. Bourdieu refers to an element that holds the absolute minimum degree of appearance in a given world as the inexistent of that world. Every world has its own inexistent, the entity that is physically present but practically erased by the ruling transcendental framework. In being an event, the basic unit of reality was the abstract mathematical set. In logics of worlds, the basic unit becomes the object. Bourdieu defines an object through a beautiful two-layered formula. An object is a mathematical multiple bound to a transcendental index. In other words, an object is not just a collection of matter, it is matter plus the explicit way it relates to everything else within its specific world. The underlying multiple represents what the object is in itself, the pure mathematical atomic bits. The transcendental index represents how the object appears in a world measured by degrees of intensity. To understand how objects behave, Bourdieu explores the mathematics of relations. In category theory, an object is never understood in isolation. It is defined entirely by its arrows, its connections, and its coordinates within a network. Bourdieu explains that inside a world, objects form assemblages or clusters. The transcendental of the world constantly evaluates how much one element resembles or influences another. This evaluation creates a web of dependencies. For example, a worker's identity within a corporate office object is entirely indexed to their relationship with the computer system, the manager's authority, and the payroll ledger. If you alter the transcendental framework, that is, the rules of the game, the very same underlying material multiple will suddenly shift its appearance, changing its intensity from a minimum degree to a maximum explosion. This structural shift is what opens the door to a radical systemic transformation. Because every world is tightly regulated by its transcendental operating system, most days follow a predictable automated routine. The rich remain highly visible and the inexistent remains hidden in the shadows. But Badiou is not a philosopher of permanent stability. He is the great philosopher of the radical breakthrough. How does genuine change occur within a world? It begins at what Bourdieu calls the site. A site is a highly specific object within a world that concentrates the system's internal contradictions. It is an area where the regular rules of appearance begin to stutter and fail. A site becomes active when it forces the world to confront its own hidden foundation. Bourdieu links the eruption of a genuine event to the sudden transformation of the inexistent. True, systemic change occurs when an event takes place at a site and the entity that previously held a minimum degree of appearance suddenly leaps to the absolute maximum degree of appearance. Let us explore historical examples across different fields to see how this revolutionary leap functions. In politics, the Paris Commune of 1871 serves as a central case study throughout Logics of Worlds. Before March 1871, the French working class, the artisans, the women of the slums, the factory laborers were the inexistent of the French bourgeois empire. They had zero political visibility, but during the uprising of the Paris Commune, these marginalized workers seized control of the city. The inexistent suddenly erupted into absolute radiant visibility, declaring an entirely new model of communal non-hierarchical justice. In art, think of the transition from the traditional academic painting to early 20th century abstraction. Under the old transcendental rules of the art world, random patches of raw color, visible brushstrokes, and non representational geometric shapes had no value. They were the inexistent of high art. When painters like Kandinsky and Malevich staged their artistic events, these raw abstract forms suddenly became the absolute center of aesthetic intensity, completely destroying the old rules of perspective. An event is an ontological earthquake. It does not just change individual opinions, it shatters the transcendental matrix of the world itself, forcing the entire system to draw a brand new map of what is visible, what is valuable, and what is true. Once an event has erupted and vanished, it leaves behind a highly volatile situation. The old world wants to slide back into its comfortable routines. To prevent the memory of the event from being erased, a new entity must materialize within the world. Bourdieu calls this the subjective body. We must be very careful here. When Bourdieu uses the word body, he does not mean a single isolated human organism. A subjective body is a collective organized structure built out of many individual human beings, materials, texts, and practices. It is a material machine designed to carry the lessons of the event into daily life. A subjective body is held together by two core components. The trace is the historical anchor point left behind by the vanished event. This can be a text, a slogan, an artistic masterpiece, or a profound memory. The elements are the individual human beings who look at the trace, pledge their absolute loyalty to it, and organize their physical lives to defend it. Think of a radical political movement. The body of the movement is not a single person, it is a combination of the activist headquarters, the printing presses, the underground networks, and the physical militants who march in the streets. This collective body acts as a new, defiant object within the world. Its job is to perform a continuous work of cultural and material construction, systematically replacing the old capitalist habits with the emerging logic of a universal truth. Not every human being reacts to an event in the same way. The eruption of a truth splits the population of a world into different factions. In one of the most brilliant psychological and political sections of Logics of Worlds, Bourdieu outlines three distinct types of subjectivity that emerge during an era of change. The faithful subject is the driver of true innovation. The subject looks at the eventual trace and declares, "This change is real, it is universal, and I will dedicate my life to exploring its consequences." Whether it is a scientist working night after night to develop a new mathematical paradigm, an artist refusing to sell out to commercial galleries, or a citizen building alternative community networks, the faithful subject organizes the collective body to prove that an alternative world is entirely possible. The reactive subject is born out of fear and cynicism. When an event shatters the old world, the reactive subject becomes deeply anxious. They miss the comfortable, predictable routines of the past. The reactive subject does not launch a violent war. Instead, they use sophisticated language to minimize what happened. They say, "Yes, the revolution was inspiring, but it is impractical. Human nature cannot sustain it. We must be realistic, compromise, and return to the established order of the market." The reactive subject is the classic conservative or neoliberal reformer who works tirelessly to pacify the volcanic energy of a truth, turning it back into a manageable consumer commodity. The obscure subject is the most dangerous and destructive figure in Bourdieu's typology. This subject does not fear the event, they completely hate it. The obscure subject looks at the universal, inclusive nature of a true event, which unites different races, classes, and languages, and views it as an absolute abomination. To destroy the truth, the obscure subject gathers a fanatical following by demanding a return to a fictional, pure, and mythic past. They invoke deep abstractions like the blood, the soil, the sacred ancestry, and the holy nation. The obscure subject weaponizes identity politics and racial supremacy to systematically crush the open, generic feel of event. This is the structural matrix of fascism, white supremacy, and religious fundamentalism. The obscure subject seeks to cure the chaos of the present by plunging the entire world into a dark abyss of systemic violence and total exclusion. As we conclude the lecture, let us bring these abstract mathematical and political threads back to the level of individual human life. We live in a world that continuously tells us to reduce our ambitions. Democratic materialism whispers in our ears every day, "You are just a biological animal. Eat well, make money, avoid pain, follow the rules of the market, protect your separate identity, and accept that nothing lasts forever." Bourdieu's Logics of Worlds stands as an unyielding, triumphant refusal of this cosmic pessimism. He proves that through the structure of category theory and the materialistic dialectic, human beings are capable of a process he calls resurrection. When an individual encounters an event, whether they are swept up in a magnificent political movement for justice, captured by a stunning new language of art, shocked by a scientific discovery, or transformed by a deep consuming personal love, they are offered an invitation to step out of their biological limitations by joining a subjective body and practicing active fidelity. That regular, fragile human being is resurrected into a subject. They stop living merely to survive, they begin living to construct something eternal. Because a true universal truth, like a mathematical theorem, a masterpiece of poetry, or an act of absolute justice, does not decay when our biological bodies die, it remains eternal, valid across all centuries and all worlds.